The last resort. Ibaru's reflection distorted in the polished marble-like surface of the Citadel Station's diplomatic wing. 5 days of meetings, 8 rejections, and now his time was running out. The weight of millions of lives pressed down on his shoulders as he adjusted the ceremonial overcoat that marked him as a representative of the southern continent of Nexus 3. The fabric felt heavy, almost as heavy as his conscience. The translator drone hovering beside him emitted a soft hum, its neural networks processing the countless languages spoken in the bustling corridors of galactic democracy. Beings of all shapes and sizes moved past him, some floating, others walking on multiple legs, and a few that seemed to phase in and out of existence. Under different circumstances, Ibaru would have been fascinated by this display of galactic diversity. But today, each alien face only reminded him of another potential rejection. "Ambassador Zeltorin will see you now," announced the spindly receptionist, their crystalline appendages creating a melodic chime as they moved. Ibaru straightened his posture and followed the guide into yet another opulent office. The ambassador's chamber was designed to accommodate various species, with environmental controls that could shift from methane atmospheres to liquid nitrogen in moments. Today, it was set to standard atmospheric conditions, a small courtesy that Ibaru noted with desperate hope. "I am not overstating this crisis," Ibaru began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "It is a matter of life and death for millions. The agricultural collapse on Nexus 3. The ambassador's translator cut him off with a tone that managed to be both polite and dismissive. "Without proper delegation backing, we cannot proceed with any formal aid requests. These are the proceedings." "But that's exactly the problem." Ibaru fought to keep his frustration in check. "The northern continent controls the planetary council. They refuse to acknowledge the severity of the situation because it primarily affects the southern regions. By the time they admit there's a crisis, millions will have." More gestures from the ambassador, followed by the mechanical voice of the translator. "Then this session is adjourned until such time when you can secure the backing of your own people." Outside the office, Ibaru checked the tiny chronometer sewn into his sleeve. One more appointment remained before his visitor's permit expired. One last chance to prevent catastrophe. He made his way to the metro station, watching the spectacular light show in the transit tunnels without really seeing it. His mind was too occupied with numbers: 3 months until the remaining food supplies ran out, 2 weeks until he'd have to return home, one last meeting to somehow change everything. The metro car's other passengers gave him a wide berth, perhaps sensing his desperation. A holographic advertisement flickered overhead, promoting some new entertainment venue in the station's leisure district. Ibaru barely noticed it, too busy rehearsing his pitch one last time. When he arrived at his final appointment, the secretary's words felt like a physical blow: "The ambassador regrets to inform you that they will not find time today." Something inside Ibaru snapped. 5 days of diplomatic smiles and polite rejections crystallized into a moment of pure, clarity-bringing rage. He turned to leave, his mind already racing through increasingly desperate options. That's when he heard it, a voice calling out from behind him in the corridor. "Ambassador." Ibaru turned, expecting another security officer ready to escort him out. Instead, he saw a human, a species he'd only read about in briefings. They were one of the newer additions to the Citadel community, having achieved faster-than-light travel just a few decades ago. "I couldn't help but overhear," the human said, their universal translator creating perfect Nexian speech. "My name is Sarah Chen, and I run a restaurant here on the station. Would you join me for a meal? It seems like you could use a friendly ear." Ibaru almost refused. What good would a meal do when millions face starvation? But something in the human's expression, genuine concern, perhaps, made him pause. Thank you," he found himself saying, following Sarah through the station's winding corridors. The restaurant was tucked away in a quiet corner of the commercial district, its entrance marked by strange symbols in the human writing system and the universal translation, "Earth's humble spot." The interior was warm and inviting, with rich wooden surfaces that Ibru later learned had been imported from Earth at great expense. As Sarah led him to a private booth, Ibru noticed something unusual about the clientele. Species that normally avoided each other were sitting together, sharing dishes and conversation. A methane-breathing Kroll was enjoying a meal next to a silicon-based Sith, their environmental suits forgotten as they focused on their food. "Welcome to my little corner of the galaxy," Sarah said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Now, tell me about these millions of lives you're trying to save." And so, over a dish that Sarah called potato soup, Ibru found himself explaining everything. He told her about the agricultural collapse on Nexus 3, caused by a rapidly mutating bacterial strain that had destroyed their primary food crops. He described how the northern continent's different agricultural system had largely protected them from the crisis, leading them to downplay the southern continent's plight. "Without help," he concluded, staring into the warm, creamy soup, "we have maybe 3 months before the famine begins. The northern continent has the resources to help, but they're using this crisis to force political concessions. And now the Citadel won't even hear us because we don't have official backing." Sarah listened intently, occasionally making notes on a small device. When Ibru finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she finally said, "humans have faced similar crises in our history. There was a time when one of our staple crops, the potato, saved millions from starvation. And now." She gestured at the bowl in front of him. "Now it brings different species together in my restaurant." Ibru looked down at his soup with new interest. "This, potato? It can grow in difficult conditions?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "It's one of the most adaptable crops we know of. We've even modified strains to grow on Mars. And the best part? It's completely compatible with Nexian biology. We verified that before adding it to our menu." For the first time in days, Ibru felt something dangerous stirring in his chest, hope. But without official support. He began. Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "Official channels aren't the only way to get things done. Did you know that my restaurant has one of the largest private hydroponics facilities on the station? We had to keep up with demand. And I happen to know quite a few agricultural scientists who owe me favors. Turns out good food is a universal language." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Your visitor's permit expires tonight, but I think we might have just found a solution that doesn't require a single ambassador's approval." As Sarah began outlining her plan, Ibru realized that sometimes hope comes not from grand diplomatic gestures, but from a simple bowl of soup and someone willing to listen. The chronometer on his sleeve continued to count down the hours until his permit expired, but for the first time since arriving at the Citadel, Ibru wasn't watching it. Instead, he was listening to Sarah explain the peculiarities of potato cultivation, each word painting a picture of possibility that no amount of diplomatic meetings had managed to achieve. Little did either of them know that this conversation, over a humble bowl of potato soup, would change not just the fate of Nexus 3, but the very nature of galactic diplomacy itself. The plan in motion. Sarah Chen's hydroponics facility was nothing like the ornate diplomatic chambers Ibru had spent the last 5 days in. Instead of polished marble and ceremonial decorations, industrial pipes and growth tanks filled the sprawling space beneath her restaurant. The air hummed with the sound of circulation systems and nutrient pumps, while specialized lighting cast everything in a purple-tinged glow. "Welcome to where the magic happens," Sarah said, leading him past rows of floating vegetables. "This is how we feed 300 customers a day from 17 different species groups." But Ibru's attention was drawn to a separate section, cordoned off from the main growing area. There, in specialized containers, hundreds of small, brown objects were sprouting in carefully controlled conditions. "Seed potatoes," Sarah explained, noticing his interest. "Each one of these can produce up to 10 new plants, and each plant can yield anywhere from 5 to 15 potatoes. With proper crop cycling and the right conditions. We could feed thousands," Ibru finished, his mind already calculating the possibilities. Millions, Sarah corrected. But we'll need help. She pulled out her communication device and began scrolling through contacts. Lucky for us, I know just the right people. Over the next hour, Sarah's private dining room transformed into an impromptu command center. A holographic display showed the faces of various beings, scientists, traders, and agricultural specialists from across the galaxy. Many were former customers, all were willing to help. Dr. Zaldar, a Venusian botanist, spoke first. The bacterial strain affecting Nexus 3's crops, send me the genetic data. I might be able to modify the potato's natural resistance to make it even more robust. My shipping company can handle distribution, added Captain Ming, a weather-worn human with elaborate stellar tattoos covering her visible skin. We've got experience running relief supplies through complicated political situations. One by one, Sarah's network of contacts offered their expertise and resources. Ibra watched in amazement as the impossible began to seem possible. These people, brought together by nothing more than good food and friendship, were accomplishing more in an hour than he had in 5 days of official meetings. But we'll need to move quickly, Sarah said, bringing up a map of Nexus 3. Ibaru's permit expires tonight, and we need him to coordinate things on the ground. About that, a new voice chimed in. The hologram shifted to show a Citadel administrative clerk, their multiple eyes blinking in synchronized patterns. I might be able to help. There's a rarely used provision for extending visitor permits in cases of cultural exchange for culinary purposes. Usually it's used for cooking competitions, but... Perfect, Sarah grinned. Ibaru is officially here to learn Earth cuisine for, let's say, a cultural festival on Nexus 3. That should buy us a few weeks. As the plans took shape, Ibaru felt a mix of hope and anxiety. This is incredible, but what about the northern continent? They control all incoming shipments. They'll never allow this. Sarah's smile turned mischievous. That's where things get interesting. Captain Ming. The tattooed captain leaned forward in her hologram. There's a loophole in Nexian import laws. Agricultural products for cultural education are exempt from standard trade restrictions. It was meant for ceremonial plants used in religious practices, but a potato is technically an agricultural product, Dr. Zaldar continued, and if we're teaching Nexians about Earth cuisine. Ibaru understood. They weren't smuggling food aid, they were conducting a cultural exchange program. The northern continent's bureaucracy, so effective at blocking official aid, would be circumvented by their own regulations. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Sarah's contacts began mobilizing resources while Dr. Zaldar's team started working on enhancing the potato strains. Captain Ming's crews prepared their ships, disguised as regular commerce vessels. But the most surprising development came from Sarah's regular customers. Word of the crisis had spread through the restaurant's network, and offers of help poured in. A Martian mining corporation offered to donate hydroponic equipment. A group of Centaurian engineers volunteered to help set up growing facilities. Even a collective of silicon-based life forms, who couldn't eat potatoes themselves, offered to optimize the growing algorithms. This is why I opened this place, Sarah told Ibaru as they watched the activity unfold. Food brings people together. It breaks down barriers. When you share a meal with someone, they stop being an alien and start being a friend. As evening approached, Ibaru received confirmation of his permit extension. The clerk had come through, buying them valuable time. But there was still one crucial piece missing. We need a way to distribute the knowledge, Ibaru said. Even with Captain Ming's ships, we can't reach everyone. People need to learn how to grow these themselves. Sarah walked over to her kitchen's computer terminal and pulled up a file. Already working on it. My sous chef is creating detailed guides, everything from basic cultivation to recipes. We'll package them with the seed potatoes. But we need to make them accessible to everyone. I might be able to help with that, a new voice joined their conversation. They turned to see one of Sarah's regular customers, a communications specialist from the Citadel's Public Information Office. "We maintain a network of emergency broadcast satellites. They're meant for crisis communications, but, well, this is technically a crisis, isn't it?" The plan was coming together faster than Ibru had dared to hope. But as he looked at the production schedules and distribution plans, a sobering thought struck him. The Northern Continent's authorities, they'll figure this out eventually. When they do. Sarah put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. By then, it'll be too late to stop it. Once people have the knowledge and the means to grow their own food, no one can take that away from them. She was right, Ibru realized. This wasn't just about emergency food aid, they were giving people the tools for self-sufficiency. The political leverage the Northern Continent held would evaporate once the South could feed itself. As the day drew to a close, Sarah's restaurant began filling with its usual dinner crowd. But tonight was different. Many of the customers were part of their improvised aid network, dropping by to coordinate details or offer additional help. The private dining room had become a command center, with holographic displays showing shipping routes and agricultural data. "You should eat something," Sarah said, placing a steaming bowl in front of Ibru. It was the same potato soup he'd had earlier, but now he understood its significance differently. This simple dish represented hope for millions. "Tomorrow," Sarah continued, "we'll start teaching you everything about potato cultivation. You need to be able to train others when you return home. Are you ready to become an expert in Earth's most versatile vegetable?" Ibra looked around the restaurant, at the unlikely coalition of beings who had come together to help people they'd never met, all because one human believed that good food and friendship could solve problems that official diplomacy couldn't. "Ready," he said, and took another spoonful of soup. The next few weeks would test them all, but for now, in this warm restaurant filled with the smell of Earth cuisine and the sound of different species breaking bread together, anything seemed possible. The potato revolution was about to begin. Unexpected allies. The first sign that their plan had been noticed came 3 weeks into the operation. Ibra was in Sarah's kitchen, recording instructional holograms about potato cultivation, when an urgent message flashed across his communication device. The Northern Continent's Trade Ministry had just announced enhanced inspection procedures for all incoming shipments. "They're on to us," he said, showing Sarah the notification. She barely looked up from where she was packaging seed potatoes. "Sooner than expected, but we planned for this. Captain Ming." The holographic display flickered to life, showing the captain's face amid what appeared to be a cargo hold. "Already implementing Plan B. My ships are rerouting through the asteroid mining colonies. The Miners' Union is helping us. Turns out they're not fond of the Northern Continent's politics either." What had started as a simple aid operation had grown into something far more complex. Sarah's restaurant had become the hub of an intricate network that stretched across multiple star systems. The original coalition of scientists and traders had expanded to include unexpected allies from all corners of galactic society. One of their most surprising supporters emerged that very afternoon. Ibru was teaching a group of Southern Continent agricultural workers about potato cultivation via secure holographic link when the restaurant's door chimed. Sarah's face went pale as she recognized the new customer. "That's Ambassador Zell Torin," Ibru whispered, recognizing the very diplomat who had dismissed his plea for help weeks ago. The ambassador's multiple eyes surveyed the restaurant, taking in the unusual activity. Their translator drone hovered close by as they approached the counter where Sarah stood. "I have received interesting reports," the ambassador's translated voice stated. "About a cultural exchange program involving Earth vegetables." Sarah maintained her professional smile. "We're very proud of our contribution to cross-cultural understanding." Indeed. The ambassador's appendages moved in what might have been amusement. "Particularly interesting is how this cultural exchange seems focused entirely on the southern continent of Nexus 3. And how the participating vessels take irregular routes through asteroid fields." The restaurant fell silent. Even the regular customers sensed the tension. But then the ambassador did something unexpected. They reached into their ceremonial robes and produced a small data crystal. I have here the classified agricultural reports from the northern continent, including their research into the crop-destroying bacteria. Research they have neglected to share with their southern neighbors. Ibaru's hearts nearly stopped. Why are you helping us? Because, the ambassador's translator droned, the Citadel's inability to act through official channels does not mean we are blind to injustice. Sometimes, the best way to uphold our principles is to look the other way while others act. The data crystal contained more than just agricultural reports. It detailed the northern continent's internal communications, revealing their strategy to use the crisis for political leverage. But it also contained something even more valuable, the exact environmental conditions that the bacteria thrived in. Dr. Zalthar's team worked through 3 solar cycles analyzing the data. When they emerged, their findings changed everything. The bacterial strain has a critical weakness, the Venusian botanist explained to the gathered coalition. It can't survive in soil with high concentrations of certain mineral compounds that are naturally present in potatoes. Sarah leaned forward. You mean? The potatoes won't just feed people, Dr. Zalthar confirmed. Over time, they'll actually help cleanse the soil. Each crop will make the land more resistant to the bacteria. The implications were staggering. They weren't just providing emergency food, they were offering a long-term solution to the crisis itself. But their success had made them vulnerable. The northern continent's authorities were increasing their efforts to track down the source of the unauthorized agricultural activity. They'd already detained several ships suspected of carrying seed potatoes. Help came from another unexpected quarter. The methane-breathing crow, who had become regular customers at Sarah's restaurant, revealed that they controlled a network of automated cargo drones. Our species cannot exist in your atmospheres, their representative explained, so we developed these drones for trade. They're registered as diplomatic vessels due to our atmospheric requirements. They cannot be searched without violating interspecies medical privacy laws. The coalition now had a virtually untouchable distribution network. The crow's drones, designed to operate in any atmosphere, could deliver seed potatoes and educational materials directly to communities across the southern continent. But the most surprising ally emerged from within the northern continent itself. A group of agricultural scientists, disgusted by their government's manipulation of the crisis, began secretly sharing data and resources. They couldn't act openly, but they provided crucial information about soil conditions and weather patterns that helped optimize the potato cultivation programs. This is bigger than politics now, one of them told Ibaru during a secured communication. We're scientists. We can't stand by while people starve for political gain. The operation had evolved far beyond its humble beginnings in Sarah's restaurant. The coalition now included beings from across the galaxy, each contributing their unique abilities and resources. The Citadel's official channels might be bound by bureaucracy, but its people had found other ways to help. One evening, as Sarah and Ibaru reviewed the latest distribution reports, she asked him, "Did you ever imagine it would grow like this?" Ibaru looked around the restaurant. At one table, a group of silicon-based life forms was analyzing soil composition data. At another, Captain Ming was coordinating with the crew about drone flight paths. The private dining room had been converted into a permanent command center, with holographic displays showing the spread of potato cultivation across the southern continent. Never, he admitted. When my last official meeting failed, I thought all hope was lost. Instead, you found that official channels aren't the only way to change things, Sarah finished. Sometimes the best diplomacy happens over a shared meal. But their moment of reflection was interrupted by an urgent alert. The Northern Continent's security forces had just announced a major operation to prevent agricultural terrorism. They were mobilizing ships to intercept unauthorized food shipments. As the coalition scrambled to respond to this new threat, Ibaru realized they had reached a critical point. The northern continent was about to escalate the situation from bureaucratic obstruction to direct confrontation. Everything they had built was at risk. Sarah must have sensed his worry. "Remember," she said, "they can stop ships, they can block shipments, but they can't stop an idea. And that's what we're really spreading, the idea that people can help each other, even when their governments won't." She was right, but Ibaru knew the next few days would test that principle to its limit. The northern continent was finally showing its hand, and the coalition would have to find new ways to adapt and survive. As the emergency meeting began, Ibaru looked at the diverse group of beings gathered in Sarah's restaurant. They had already accomplished the impossible once. Now they would have to do it again. Crisis and innovation. The northern continent's security blockade materialized with brutal efficiency. Within hours, a network of patrol ships had established choke points around major shipping lanes. The official announcement declared it a temporary measure to prevent contaminated agricultural products from threatening planetary security. In Sarah's restaurant, now operating as the coalition's command center, the mood was tense but determined. Holographic displays showed the positions of their supply ships, now forced to remain in holding patterns just outside Nexus 3's orbit. "They can't maintain this blockade forever," Captain Ming insisted, her tattooed hands manipulating the tactical display. "The cost alone." "They don't need forever," Ibaru interrupted. "Just long enough for the southern continent to miss the planting window for the next growing cycle. Without those seedlings in the ground within the next 15 days. He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what failure would mean. That's when Dr. Zalthar's hologram burst into life, the Venusian botanist's expression showing rare excitement. "I need everyone to see this immediately." The main display shifted to show microscopic images of potato cells. "We've been approaching this wrong," the botanist explained. "Instead of trying to smuggle whole potatoes or seedlings, what if we could reduce everything to the cellular level?" Sarah leaned forward. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Spores," Dr. Zalthar said. "We can modify the potato cells to produce spore-like structures. Microscopic, hardy, and most importantly, easily mistaken for natural pollen by standard scanning equipment." The implications hit Ibaru like a gravitational wave. They're looking for food shipments and seedlings. Not pollen. Exactly. And here's the brilliant part, we can encode the entire genetic sequence for potato cultivation, along with growth instructions, into the spores themselves. When reconstituted with the right chemical trigger, they'll grow into fully viable seed potatoes. The restaurant erupted into activity as the coalition mobilized around this new possibility. The Krull's automated drones were reprogrammed for high-altitude dispersal. The silicon-based life forms began calculating optimal distribution patterns based on atmospheric currents. But they still needed a way to inform the southern population about the plan without alerting northern authorities. That's when one of Sarah's youngest customers, a teenage human who had been quietly observing their meetings while doing homework, spoke up. "What about the entertainment networks?" she suggested. "My friends and I share coded messages through music streams all the time. The sensors never catch them because they're looking for words, not patterns." Sarah's eyes lit up. "The recipe sharing network. We already have thousands of followers watching our cooking broadcasts. If we could encode instructions into the background music." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Dr. Zalthar's team worked continuously to perfect the spore transformation process. The Centaurian engineers modified the Krull's drones to carry specialized dispersal units. The communications team, led by Sarah's teenage customer, created an elaborate system of coded recipes that would tell people when and where to expect spore releases. But the northern continent had grown suspicious. Their security forces began monitoring entertainment broadcasts, looking for unusual patterns. They increased atmospheric scanning, claiming concerns about unauthorized biological agents. The coalition's response came from yet another unexpected source. The methane-breathing crow revealed that their species' religious practices included the regular release of ceremonial spores into the atmosphere. These releases were protected by galactic laws concerning religious freedom. If we time our dispersal to coincide with the crow's ceremonial calendar, Ibaru realized, any unusual atmospheric readings will be attributed to their religious practices. The plan was audacious, combining cutting-edge bioengineering with ancient religious rites. But would it be enough? The answer came sooner than expected. The northern continent's authorities, convinced they had contained the agricultural terrorism, announced a relaxation of the blockade. They had no way of knowing that millions of microscopic potatoes were already drifting through Nexus 3's upper atmosphere, riding global wind currents toward the southern continent. But the coalition's greatest challenge still lay ahead. The spores would need precise conditions to transform into viable seed potatoes. They had encoded the instructions into their cooking broadcasts, but coordinating millions of people to act at exactly the right moment would be nearly impossible. That's when Ambassador Zeltoran made their most overt move yet. The Citadel's emergency broadcast system, supposedly conducting a routine test, began transmitting a simple weather advisory. To most, it seemed like ordinary meteorological data. But hidden within the technical specifications was a precise timeline for spore activation. The coalition held their breath as the crucial day approached. If the northern continent realized what was happening, if the spores failed to activate properly, if any one of 1,000 variables went wrong. But they had underestimated the power of hope. All across the southern continent, people who had been secretly following Sarah's cooking shows understood what needed to be done. Communities coordinated without directly communicating. Fields were prepared under the guise of cultural festivals. The day of activation arrived. Sarah's restaurant was packed with coalition members, all watching the atmospheric monitors. Dr. Zaldar's team had calculated that they would know within hours if the transformation was successful. The first confirmation came from a small farming community near the equator. Then another from the coastal regions. Soon reports were flooding in from across the southern continent. The spores were activating, transforming into viable seed potatoes exactly as designed. But the northern continent had one last card to play. Their security forces announced the discovery of biological contamination in the atmosphere and began preparing for large-scale atmospheric cleansing. Ibaru watched in horror as the announcement scrolled across their screens. They'll destroy everything. All our work. No, Sarah said firmly. They won't. She turned to the ambassador's hologram. I believe it's time for the Citadel to officially notice what's happening on Nexus 3. Ambassador Zeltoran's appendages moved in what might have been a smile. Indeed. I believe the Citadel would be very interested in reports of a government planning to release atmospheric toxins in violation of at least 15 galactic environmental protocols. Within hours, the Citadel had issued an emergency injunction preventing any atmospheric cleansing. The northern continent, suddenly facing intense diplomatic scrutiny, was forced to back down. As the coalition celebrated, Ibaru found himself back at the same table where this had all started, sharing a bowl of potato soup with Sarah. We did it, he said, still hardly believing it. Sarah smiled. No, we proved something even more important. We proved that when ordinary people work together, they can overcome any obstacle. Even their own governments. But their work wasn't finished. The first crops would need protection and care. The soil would need time to heal. And most importantly, the relationship between the northern and southern continents would need to be addressed. Yet as Ibaru looked around the restaurant, at the unlikely family they had built, humans and aliens, scientists and traders, diplomats and chefs, he knew that they would face whatever came next together. The potato revolution had succeeded not through force or official power, but through cooperation, innovation, and the simple act of sharing food with strangers. A new way forward. One standard year after the Great Potato Revolution, Sarah's restaurant had changed. The command center equipment was gone from the private dining room, replaced by an elegant display showcasing images from across Nexus 3, thriving potato fields stretching to the horizon, bustling markets filled with new varieties of food, and most importantly, people from both continents working side by side. Ibaru stood at the restaurant's entrance, adjusting his new ceremonial robes, no longer the heavy garments of a desperate diplomat, but the simpler attire of what humans called a farmer diplomat. He was early for the celebration, but he wanted to take in the moment. "Still can't believe it's been a year," Sarah said, joining him at the doorway. Her restaurant had expanded, now occupying 3 levels of the Citadel station. The original level remained a restaurant, but the upper floor had become a cultural center, and the lower level housed the newly established Galactic Agricultural Exchange Program. "The latest reports from home are even better than we hoped," Ibaru said, pulling up holographic data. "The potato-modified soil has reduced bacterial infection rates by 89%. Some regions are already experimenting with reintroducing traditional crops. But the changes went far beyond agriculture. The crisis had transformed Nexus 3's society in unexpected ways. The northern continent's attempt to exploit the food crisis had backfired spectacularly, leading to widespread reforms and the election of a new, more cooperative government. Ambassador Zeltorin's timing was perfect," Sarah remarked, referring to the Citadel's eventual intervention. "By waiting until we'd proven our solution worked, they gave us leverage no official aid package could have provided." The ambassador themselves would be attending today's celebration, along with representatives from every species that had helped with the operation. The event marked the official inauguration of the Galactic Agricultural Exchange Program, a new Citadel initiative inspired by their unconventional success. "Speaking of exchanges," Sarah said, "how are the new Earth vegetables adapting?" Ibaru's expression brightened. "The tomatoes are struggling a bit, but the carrots are thriving. And someone had the idea to crossbreed potatoes with a native tuber. The results are interesting. Interesting good, or interesting bad. The taste test is part of tonight's celebration. You'll see." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the first guests. Captain Ming entered with several of her crew, their stellar tattoos now incorporating small potato designs, a badge of pride among those who had participated in the spore runs, as they'd come to be called. Dr. Zaldar arrived next, accompanied by a team of young botanists from both Nexian continents. The Venusian scientist had established a permanent research facility on Nexus 3, studying the interaction between Earth crops and native species. The Kroll delegation brought news that their religious spore ceremony had inspired actual spiritual discussions among their people about the role of food in connecting different species. Several Kroll philosophers had written treatises on the subject. As the restaurant filled, Ibaru noticed how the gathering reflected the changes their actions had sparked across the galaxy. Species that had barely interacted before now shared tables and stories. The silicon-based life forms, who couldn't eat physical food, had developed programs to experience taste through data analysis, leading to unprecedented insights into cross-species cuisine. The teenage human who had suggested using entertainment networks for communication was there too, now heading a youth program that taught coding through cooking shows. Her work had inspired a whole new approach to educational broadcasting. Ambassador Zeltorin arrived last, their translator drone now programmed with what they called culinary diplomacy protocols. The ambassador had become a strong advocate for informal diplomatic channels, arguing that sometimes the most effective negotiations happened over shared meals rather than in official chambers. As the celebration began, Sarah called for attention. The restaurant's walls transformed into a panoramic display showing live feeds from across Nexus 3. "A year ago," she began, "we proved that galaxies aren't changed just by grand diplomatic gestures or official aid programs. Sometimes, they're changed by people sharing what they have, whether that's food, knowledge, or simply the willingness to help." Ibaru stepped forward to join her. "What started as a desperate attempt to save my people became something much more. We didn't just find a way to feed the hungry, we created a new model for how different species can work together. The displays showed scenes from the newly established agricultural cooperatives where northern and southern Nexians worked together, sharing knowledge and resources. Other images showed similar programs starting on other worlds, inspired by their success. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah continued, we proved that no problem is too big when people choose to help each other. The official channels said it couldn't be done. The authorities said it shouldn't be done. But here we are. She gestured to the gathered crowd, humans, aliens, and artificial intelligences, all united by their part in the potato revolution. And this is just the beginning. The celebration continued late into the night. Stories were shared, new alliances were formed, and plans were made for future collaborations. The Galactic Agricultural Exchange Program already had requests from dozens of worlds seeking to participate. As the evening wound down, Ibru found himself back at the same table where he had first tasted potato soup a year ago. Sarah joined him, carrying 2 bowls. Try this, she said, placing one before him. It's made with those hybrid potatoes you mentioned. Your people's scientists did something remarkable with them. Ibru tasted the soup. It was familiar yet different, the comfort of earth potatoes blended with the distinctive flavors of his homeworld. It was, he realized, a perfect symbol of what they had achieved, not just survival, but something new and better created through cooperation. You know, Sarah said, when I opened this restaurant, I thought I was just creating a place where different species could enjoy good food together. I never imagined. That's exactly what you did, Ibru interrupted gently. You created a place where differences didn't matter, where people could come together and help each other. Everything else grew from that. Outside the restaurant's windows, the Citadel station continued its eternal orbit. Ships came and went, carrying traders, diplomats, and now, thanks to their efforts, seeds and knowledge to worlds that needed them. The potato revolution had ended, but its effects would ripple across the galaxy for generations to come. In the end, they had done more than save one continent on one world. They had shown that the shortest distance between crisis and solution wasn't always through official channels. Sometimes, it was through a small restaurant where anyone could find a warm meal and a willing ear. As the last guests departed, Sarah began preparing for the next day's service. There would be new customers tomorrow, perhaps with new problems to solve. But now they knew that with enough creativity, cooperation, and courage, no challenge was insurmountable. The galaxy had learned the power of potato diplomacy, and nothing would ever be quite the same again.